There are moments in life when the person staring back at you in the mirror feels unfamiliar, not because your features have changed, but because you start to sense the weight of the things you carry. Habits, patterns, ways of being that once seemed harmless, even ordinary, suddenly begin to feel heavier than they should. It starts small. Maybe it's a comment you overhear, a glance exchanged in a room, the way someone's tone shifts when you walk in. You don't notice it at first. These moments stack up slowly, like stones in your pocket, but eventually you realize you're sinking. People respond differently. Respect, once freely given, becomes harder to find. Relationships shift without explanation. And then you ask yourself, what am I doing that makes people see me differently than I see myself? There's a sobering truth that hits hard when you realize it's not the world changing, it's you, and not in the way you'd hoped. Because sometimes we fall into patterns that seem benign on the surface, but quietly erode the foundation of how others perceive us. Not everyone's willing to tell you that you're starting to lose their respect. Most will simply drift away. But if you're lucky, or if you're willing to be honest with yourself, you start to catch it, the quiet damage, the little cracks. And it's in those moments that real transformation begins. Not because someone scolded you into changing, but because something inside of you whispered, "This isn't who I want to be." That whisper came to me when I wasn't expecting it. Back then, I didn't think I had anything to fix. I was just living, floating through the rhythm of my routines, laughing with friends, getting by at work. I thought I was doing fine, until I noticed the way people stopped confiding in me, the way conversations felt shallow, how the energy shifted when I walked into a room. I brushed it off at first. People get busy, people change. That's what I told myself. But the truth was simpler and harder. I had picked up some habits that made others keep their distance, and I didn't realize the impact until I couldn't deny it anymore. The first time I truly felt it was during a group chat with friends, one of those casual threads where memes get tossed around and plans get loosely made. There was a joke I made. It wasn't cruel, just a jab. Everyone laughed, but not in a real way. It was the kind of laughter that avoids tension, not the kind that comes from connection. And then someone quietly left the chat. No drama, just gone. That's when it started to click. Maybe this wasn't about what was said. Maybe it was about the environment I was helping to create. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stepped back. I started observing, not others, but myself. That's how I began to see it. The way I contributed to gossip, not maliciously, but passively. The way I interrupted, not out of disrespect, but out of eagerness or maybe insecurity. The way I broke promises, not intentionally, but through poor planning and thoughtless commitment. The way I complained, not to vent, but as a habit, like a song I couldn't stop humming. I saw how these small things, stacked together, created a version of me that didn't match who I thought I was. And that discrepancy, it broke my heart a little, because deep down, I knew I wanted to be someone who earned respect, not demanded it. Someone people trusted with their truth. Someone whose presence brought peace, not tension. But wanting to be that person wasn't enough. I had to become them. And becoming meant facing the parts of me I'd ignored for too long. It meant owning the hurt I'd caused, even unintentionally. It meant walking backward through my own behavior and asking, where did I go wrong? There was one story that haunted me more than the rest, a memory from college, when I sat in a circle of friends and turned someone else's vulnerability into entertainment. I didn't mean to, but that's the thing about gossip. It doesn't ask for permission. It slips into conversation like smoke, and before you know it, you're coughing from the fallout. I remember the girl clearly, soft-spoken, always on the edge of the group, eyes that watched more than they spoke. She trusted me with a truth about her feelings for someone, a small, quiet truth. And instead of holding it with care, I shared it, casually, thoughtlessly. By the end of the week, everyone knew. And she never looked at me the same again. I told myself back then that it wasn't a big deal, that everyone gossips, that it was just talk. But I knew better. The look in her eyes wasn't anger, it was betrayal. And betrayal, no matter how small, sticks. That memory followed me. It changed the way I listened to conversations, how easily we turn other people's stories into our own punchlines, how quickly we trade trust for approval. I started to see gossip for what it really is, a subtle form of violence, a way of diminishing someone when they're not there to defend themselves, a test of character that most of us fail without realizing. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that's where change begins. Not with grand apologies or dramatic declarations, but with the choice to stop, to hold someone's story with the reverence it deserves, to honor the trust people place in you when they speak their truths. I started to speak less, to listen more. I stopped asking for the details that didn't belong to me. I learned to let silence sit where gossip used to be. And in doing so, I began to feel lighter, not just in how I was perceived, but in how I perceived myself. And it wasn't just gossip. That was only the beginning. I started to trace the lines of my behavior in other areas, like my reliability, or the lack of it, how often I'd make plans and bail, how many times I'd say yes and not follow through. I thought it was harmless, that people understood, that life got busy, but busyness isn't an excuse for carelessness. And the people I let down, they didn't always confront me. Most just stopped counting on me. They adjusted their expectations downward, and I never even noticed, until the invitation stopped coming, until the silence replaced the check-ins. I remembered one particular birthday, a close friend. She'd planned everything months in advance, made it clear how important it was. I said I'd be there. I meant it. But when the day came, I chose something else. I didn't even message her until it was too late. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just retreated. And I knew then, in that quiet space, that I'd done something I couldn't undo. I hadn't just missed a party. I'd communicated that she didn't matter as much as whatever I chose instead. And that kind of message, it cuts deeper than any insult. That's when I began to understand what reliability really is. It's not about perfection. It's not about being available all the time. It's about integrity, about making your word mean something, about showing up, not because it's convenient, but because you said you would. That's what earns trust. That's what builds a reputation that people respect. And once you lose that, it's hard to earn it back. So I started making fewer promises, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted to make sure I could keep the ones I made. I began to value follow-through more than flattery. I turned up when I said I would, and slowly people noticed. The trust, once cracked, began to mend. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And in that process, I realized something profound. When you show up for others, you also show up for yourself. You become someone your future self can be proud of. There's a weight to being unreliable that most people don't acknowledge until it starts to echo back at them. You think you're floating through life just fine, moving from moment to moment, believing that people will understand your intentions even if your actions don't align. But intentions don't hold weight after a while. They fade, they blur. And what's left is the trail of commitments you never honored, of doors you left half open and conversations you abandoned without closure. You don't realize it at first because people rarely confront you when they start losing respect. They just begin adjusting. They start offering you fewer pieces of their trust, handing you less of their story, withdrawing in ways so subtle you won't even catch it. until the room is quiet and the silence feels like an accusation. There was a time I didn't realize how much of a person's reputation is built not on how they behave when people are watching, but how they behave when no one is keeping score. The little things, like being on time, keeping your word, being present when someone is speaking. For the longest time, I thought I could coast on charm, on likability, on shared history. But charm doesn't repair broken commitments, and likability won't keep people around when they no longer feel safe relying on you. People may still smile at you, they may still laugh at your jokes, but the closeness fades. You become a version of a person in their life, not the person. You're a placeholder. You're part of the background noise. And when you begin to recognize that shift, really recognize it, it shakes something inside you. Because you're not just losing people, you're losing yourself. The version of you you once believed in starts to fracture. The mirror doesn't lie. You look at yourself and you see the disconnect, the places where your ego spoke louder than your actions, the promises you made just to be agreeable, just to avoid confrontation, just to feel liked in the moment, even if you knew you wouldn't follow through. And in those quiet realizations, you meet the hardest part of growth: accountability. No one teaches you how to hold yourself accountable without drowning in shame. But there's a difference. Shame says you are the mistake. Accountability says you made a mistake and you can do better. And when you lean into that second voice, the one that calls you forward instead of burying you, you begin to change. Not performatively, not out of guilt, but out of integrity. Because you start to crave the version of you who people trust, who shows up, who listens with intention and speaks with purpose. I remember sitting with a friend I hadn't seen in years. The energy between us was off, not cold, but distant. I tried to joke, to rebuild the easy rhythm we once had. But her responses were tight, guarded. Eventually, she said something that pierced through the casual banter. You were never really there when it mattered. She didn't say it to wound me. She said it because she had carried that truth silently for years. And in that moment, I couldn't deny it. She was right. I had disappeared when she needed support. I had missed moments that shaped her life while I was caught up in my own distractions. And hearing it aloud didn't just hurt, it clarified. That conversation became a turning point. Not because I suddenly became perfect, but because I finally understood the cost of being careless with people. I realized that being a good person in your heart doesn't mean much if your behavior contradicts it. That integrity is about consistency, not convenience. That trust isn't a faucet you can turn on and off when it suits you. It's a well that dries up if you don't nurture it. And when it runs dry, people don't always tell you. They just stop coming to drink. So I began a quiet reconstruction of my life. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I just started paying attention to how I listened, to how I followed through, to whether my words carried weight. I stopped making jokes at someone else's expense just to fill silences. I started replying to messages with presence, not just speed. I stopped canceling plans unless I absolutely had to. And slowly I noticed something shift, not just in others, but in myself. I liked who I was becoming. I respected myself more when I acted in alignment with my intentions. And that self-respect bled into everything. You begin to notice how powerful it is to be a person of your word, how rare and valuable it is to be the one others can count on. Not because you're always perfect, but because you're always there. You become a lighthouse, quiet, consistent, grounded. You no longer rely on dramatic gestures to prove your worth. You let your reliability speak for you. And when people recognize that energy in you, the dynamic changes. Respect flows back into the spaces where it once leaked out. And it's not performative respect, it's earned. rooted, real. But the journey isn't always smooth. There will still be moments where you catch yourself slipping, where the old patterns rise up and ask to be indulged. The urge to say yes when you know you shouldn't. The temptation to cancel when commitment feels inconvenient. The reflex to talk instead of listen. But now you have awareness. And awareness is the beginning of mastery. You'll pause, you'll check yourself. You'll ask, is this who I want to be? And most of the time, you'll choose better. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And with that shift, a deeper transformation begins. You start becoming someone people trust with their truths. They tell you things not because they expect advice or validation, but because they feel safe. Your presence becomes a permission slip. Your silence becomes sacred. People know that what they share with you won't be twisted, repeated, or weaponized. That kind of trust isn't loud. It's felt. It's the way someone exhales around you, the way they pause and decide to keep talking, the way they say, I don't tell many people this. You start seeing these moments not as casual conversation, but as sacred exchanges, and you treat them that way. You become someone who protects stories, who holds space without rushing to fill it. You learn that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer is your full attention. Not advice, not answers, just presence. And in a world addicted to noise, your presence becomes a balm. That's when you realize that respect, the kind that really matters, isn't built through performance. It's built through presence, through listening when it's uncomfortable, through keeping your word when no one is watching, through walking away from gossip, even when it's easy to participate, through saying, I'm sorry when you get it wrong, and meaning it, through saying, I see you, in a way that makes someone believe it. And as you live in that energy, your relationships begin to evolve. Some people fall away, not because you pushed them out, but because they were attached to the version of you that tolerated less, that gossiped more, that stayed small to make others comfortable. And that's okay. You release them with grace. You don't beg to be understood anymore. You don't chase people who only knew the draft version of who you're becoming. You make peace with the pruning process, because what remains is solid, rooted, aligned. You find yourself surrounded by people who value what you value, who speak with intention, who show up when they say they will, who don't mistake your kindness for weakness or your silence for ignorance. These are people who mirror your growth, who challenge you with love, who remind you that you're not alone on the path, even when it feels lonely. And that's what healing really gives you. Not perfection, but alignment. Not control over others, but clarity within yourself. You stop living in reaction. You start living in intention. You stop measuring your worth by how many people approve of you and start asking, do I respect the person I'm becoming? And when the answer is yes, everything changes. The way you walk into rooms, the way you speak your name, the way you carry your silence, the way you stay soft without bending. You stop needing to be the loudest voice in the room. You let your consistency speak louder. You let your absence be felt when your presence isn't honored. You let your energy say, I'm not available for anything that dishonors the peace I've fought to build. That's how you become unshakable, not through arrogance, but through alignment. There's a point where your spirit starts craving something quieter. Not silence in the absence of noise, but silence in the presence of meaning. A stillness that doesn't make you anxious anymore. A quiet that holds you instead of haunting you. And when you reach that point, you realize it's not because the world has changed. It's because you've outgrown the chaos you used to normalize. You've stopped reaching for distraction like a life raft. You've stopped measuring your self-worth in how full your calendar is. How many people are texting you back? How many likes, how many invites? How much validation you can gather in one day? Instead, you begin to crave slowness, depth, peace, presence. the richness of your own company. You find yourself taking longer to answer, not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You think before you speak. You pause before you react. You leave a message unread for a few more minutes because you want to be in it when you reply. You start giving people the same kind of attention you used to chase, and something powerful happens. You realize how little of it actually exists. You notice how few people really listen, how few people ask questions without trying to steer the answer. How many conversations are just waiting games until the other person can speak again? And instead of resenting it, you observe it, not from judgment, but from clarity. And that clarity teaches you everything. It teaches you how to show up with intention, how to speak less but mean more, how to listen with your whole being instead of just your ears. You start hearing what people don't say. You hear the silence behind their laughter, the tension in their voice when they say, "I'm fine," and you stop brushing past it. You sit in it with them. You let the quiet do some of the talking. You hold space, not to fix, not to advise, but to witness, because you know now that being witnessed is one of the rarest kinds of love there is. And you offer that love freely because you finally learned how to offer it to yourself. That kind of love doesn't come quickly. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, moments where you surprise yourself, where you reach for grace instead of judgment, where you breathe through the feeling instead of trying to change it, where you let yourself cry without hurrying the process, where you forgive yourself for how long it's taken to get here. And every time you do, something inside you softens, something old releases its grip, and in that release, a new version of you emerges, one that no longer runs from the mirror. You begin to see your own patterns, not as flaws, but as echoes. Echoes of moments when you weren't met with the love you needed. Echoes of abandonment, of neglect, of not being chosen. You see how those echoes shaped you, how they still whisper when you're tired or triggered or lonely. But now, instead of obeying them, you face them. You ask, "What are you trying to protect me from?" And they answer, not in words, but in memories. They show you where the wound began. And from there, you can start to heal it, not by erasing it, but by holding it. You become your own safe space. You hold your own hand through hard nights. You talk to yourself with gentleness, not punishment. You say, "I know you're hurting, but I've got you," and you mean it. That inner relationship becomes your foundation. You no longer seek someone else to fill the space within you. You decorate it yourself, with rituals, with routines, with the quiet joy of just being. And in that space, you become magnetic, not because you're performing, but because you're present. Not because you're loud, but because you're rooted. People start noticing. They can't name it, but they feel it. The way your energy is steady, the way you speak from your chest, not your wounds, the way you move through the world without needing to prove yourself, and it challenges them. Not everyone will be ready for it. Some will try to pull you back into the roles you used to play, the fixer, the chameleon, the one who overextends just to be accepted. But you don't fit there anymore. You've outgrown the spaces that ask you to shrink. You don't shrink now. You take up space, not to dominate, but to exist fully, to breathe deeply, to love openly. You stop editing yourself to make other people comfortable. You stop translating your truth into something more palatable. You let yourself be seen in your entirety, and in doing so, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects what's real. And some will love you for it, others will leave. Let them. You're not here to be for everyone. You're here to be you. That realization gives you freedom. You stop fearing rejection. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop asking for seats at tables that require you to beg. If it costs your self-respect, it's too expensive. If it asks you to hide, it's not for you. And if it feels like you have to earn love, it's not love, it's control. You see it now. You name it now. You walk away now. Not with bitterness, but with peace. Peace becomes your compass, your filter, your metric. Does this feel chaotic or calm? Does this drain me or nourish me? Does this bring me closer to myself or pull me away? You start asking these questions without guilt. You no longer feel selfish for choosing yourself. You see self-care not as a luxury, but as a requirement. You protect your mornings, your mind, your rest. You stop just surviving and start building a life that actually fits you. And in that life, you stop rushing. You stop filling every moment. You create margin for breath, for joy, for nothing. You realize how healing boredom can be, how beautiful it is to be unproductive, to stare at the sky, to let your thoughts wander without trying to harness them. You stop measuring your value in how busy you are. You rest deeply, without apology, because you've earned it, because your nervous system is tired, because you're done proving your grind. You're here to live, not just to hustle your way through life and call it ambition. You learn to receive compliments, help, support, rest. You stop saying, "I'm fine," when you're not. You stop pretending that doing it alone is a badge of honor. It's not, it's survival. And survival is noble, but it's not sustainable. You reach, you ask, you lean, and when someone offers you softness, you don't flinch. You say thank you. You let it land. You let yourself be held because you've spent too long being the strong one. And strength without softness becomes armor that isolates. You're learning balance now, not the kind that juggles 100 things at once, but the kind that says, today I choose joy over obligation, presence over performance, peace over people-pleasing. You understand that balance isn't about doing everything. It's about doing what matters. And what matters is what aligns with who you're becoming. Not who you used to be, not who others expect you to be, but who you choose to be every single day. And you'll have setbacks. You'll have moments when the old you returns, when you fall into patterns you thought you outgrew, when your voice trembles and your boundaries bend, and your healing feels like a myth. But those moments don't erase your progress. They remind you that healing is a spiral, that you revisit lessons until they root, that growth is rarely linear, and every time you come back to yourself, you do it with more clarity, more compassion, more courage. You've stopped trying to rush your healing. You understand now that it unfolds in layers, that every breakdown is a breakthrough in disguise, that every closed door redirected you, that every goodbye made room for a deeper hello. And now when you look back, you don't just see pain, you see wisdom, you see strength, you see the fire you walked through and the gold you became on the other side. And this is just the beginning. You don't always realize when you've started losing people's respect. It's not always loud. No one sits you down to say, "I don't trust you anymore." It's quieter than that. It shows up in unanswered messages, in shrinking invitations, in the way people's eyes move past you in the room instead of stopping to meet yours. It happens one moment at a time. One broken promise, one careless word, one choice to speak when you should have stayed silent. And before you know it, you're no longer seen as the person they once admired. That's the thing about respect. It's not demanded, it's earned. And even more so, it can be lost. I learned that the hard way. It's one thing to reflect and recognize your bad habits. It's another to realize how those habits ripple out, how they shape how others see you and how you see yourself. There were things I used to brush off, things I laughed about. Everyone gossips, I used to say. It's just talking. But then one day, someone shared something private with me, something real, and I let it slip. Not to be cruel, not to hurt them, but just because I wanted to feel closer to the people I was with. So I told the story. It got a few laughs, but the next day I saw the face of the person I betrayed. And in that moment, the laughs didn't matter. What I felt was shame. Gossiping isn't just a bad habit. It's a betrayal dressed as conversation. It's the moment you trade someone else's trust for your own temporary comfort. And you always pay for it. Maybe not right away, maybe not directly, but you lose something each time. And once it's gone, it's hard to get back. I saw it in friendships that grew colder, in co-workers who stopped confiding in me, in the way people started choosing their words more carefully around me, not because I was trustworthy, but because I wasn't. It wasn't just the loss of connection that hurt. It was realizing that I wasn't the person I thought I was. I had to sit with that version of myself, the one who prioritized being interesting over being kind, the one who traded character for clout, and it hurt. But it also woke me up. The Stoics teach that silence is often more powerful than speech, that speaking less can actually give you more clarity, more integrity, more peace. And now I see it so clearly. When you speak with discipline, you carry a kind of strength that can't be faked. Then there was the habit of flaking, saying yes when I didn't mean it, making plans I knew I wouldn't keep. I used to think being a little unreliable wasn't that big of a deal. Everyone's busy, I'd tell myself. Life happens. But the truth is, when you make a habit of not showing up, people stop counting on you. They stop including you. They stop trusting that your words mean anything. And eventually they stop inviting you altogether. That's how it fades. Not with anger, not with a fight, just with less. I remember missing a close friend's birthday party. It wasn't dramatic, I just decided not to go. I figured she wouldn't care that much. But she did. She'd planned it for weeks, counted on me. And when I didn't show, something in her shifted. She didn't say anything big, just got quieter, softer. Until one day, she stopped calling. And I knew it wasn't because of that one night. It was because of all the other nights before it, all the canceled plans, all the maybes that turned into nothing. Being unreliable doesn't just hurt other people, it erodes who you are. You start seeing yourself as someone who doesn't follow through, someone whose words float instead of land. And that's a hard story to carry. But the beautiful thing about stories is that they can be rewritten. You can choose to become someone others can count on. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but with heart, with intention. And when you do, you'll feel it. In the way people open up to you again. In the way they breathe easier in your presence. Then there was the way I used to speak in conversations. I thought jumping in quickly meant I was smart, engaged, active. But I didn't realize how often I cut people off. How often I spoke just to be heard, not to understand. Until someone told me straight up, "You don't listen, you just wait for your turn to speak." That one landed like a punch, because deep down I knew it was true. I wasn't really holding space for anyone. I was performing. And even when I meant well, it still made others feel invisible. I thought empathy meant sharing my version of the story. I get it. This happened to me too. But sometimes that kind of sharing isn't connection. It's hijacking. It's shifting the spotlight instead of sitting in the shadows with someone else. And once you become aware of that, you can't unsee it. You start catching yourself, holding back, waiting. And in that waiting, you create space for something sacred, someone else's truth. The Stoics speak of self-control as a virtue, and in conversation, that control looks like silence, looks like listening with the intent to understand, not to respond. I remember being in a group setting once, and someone was opening up about their anxiety. It took courage for them to speak, but I jumped in too fast, shared my own struggles, tried to comfort them with my story. I thought I was helping, but the look on their face said otherwise. I'd taken their moment and made it mine. And I'll never forget that, because I saw how easy it is to wound someone gently, with good intentions, with the best of words, and how silence, true, present, listening silence, would have meant so much more. And then, the complaining, the constant need to voice every inconvenience, every frustration. I thought it made me relatable. I thought it made me real. But what I didn't realize was that my negativity was a weight others had to carry too. Every room I walked into, I added to the heaviness. Every conversation, I turned toward what wasn't working. And over time, people pulled away. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have the energy to carry what I refused to set down. A friend once told me, "I love you, but being around you feels heavy." That was hard to hear, but it was honest. And it made me think about what I was giving to the world. Was I bringing light? Was I bringing calm? Or was I just handing out my pain like it was everyone's responsibility? There's a difference between venting and infecting. One clears the air, the other spreads the storm. And I'd spent too long doing the latter. The Stoics believed in focusing on what we can control, and complaints are often just unspoken admissions that we've given our power away. We complain when we feel helpless, but when you shift into ownership, you complain less. You speak differently. You move with quiet resolve instead of loud resistance. And people feel that. They respect it, because presence is powerful and peace is magnetic. Over time, I've come to see these habits for what they really are. Not just personality quirks, but symptoms of deeper patterns, a fear of being forgotten, a need to be seen, a craving for control in a world that feels unpredictable. But when you bring those patterns into the light, when you examine them with honesty and without shame, you can transform them, not overnight, not with one revelation, but with steady intention, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. You start to build a new story, one where your words carry weight because you don't use them carelessly, one where your presence is a gift, not a burden, one where you show up, not just when it's convenient, but when it matters. And people feel the difference. They lean in, they trust you again. They look you in the eye and know, this person is real. This person has done the work. This person respects themselves and therefore earns mine. That's the kind of life I want now. Not one where I'm liked by everyone, but one where I can look in the mirror and know I've earned my own respect, that I speak with care, that I listen with heart, that I show up. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that kind of honesty, it rebuilds everything. It starts quietly, not with a breakdown, not with a bang, but with a subtle disconnection. One day you look in the mirror and something feels off. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. You're doing everything right on the surface. Showing up, replying to texts, being polite, smiling when it's expected. But deep down, there's a numbness settling in. A sense that you're existing, not living. You begin to notice how your laughter doesn't feel like it used to, how your body doesn't relax, even in rest. You can't pinpoint when the shift began, but now you're fully in it, and it's hard to ignore. You start going through the motions. You say, "I'm good," when asked how you are. You force energy into spaces that used to light you up, but now feel like chores. You keep trying to catch up on sleep, on happiness, on a sense of meaning. But no matter what you do, something's always missing. It's not sadness exactly. It's not that dramatic. It's more like a slow erosion of self, one unnoticed layer at a time. And the scary part, no one seems to notice, because you're functioning. You're fine. You're still doing what you're supposed to, still productive, still available. And that's where the weight settles, because there's no external sign that something's wrong, no broken pieces to show, just an invisible heaviness that you carry into every moment. You wonder if it's all in your head, if maybe this is just adulthood, but deep down you know this isn't how it's supposed to feel. You try to fix it in all the usual ways. You dive into work, try to stay busy. You scroll endlessly, convincing yourself that the next post will distract you. You text people just to not be alone, but the conversations feel hollow. You sleep more, but wake up tired. You start to chase energy like it's something outside of you, something you can capture if you just try hard enough. But the harder you chase, the more drained you feel, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Eventually, your body starts talking louder. The headaches come more often. The fatigue becomes more than just physical. You cancel plans more frequently, not because you don't care, but because you just don't have it in you. You feel guilty about it, of course, so you apologize, make promises you know you might not keep, and that adds to the weight. Because now you're carrying not just your exhaustion, but your shame. And still, no one really notices. Or if they do, they don't say much. They assume you're just tired, just busy, just quiet. You've always been the strong one, the one who keeps it all together. So when you start falling apart, people don't notice, because you're falling apart in ways that look a lot like functioning. That's when you realize burnout doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, it seeps into your routine, it disguises itself as normal. It convinces you that you're just lazy, unmotivated, or broken. And you believe it until one day your body says no. It refuses. You wake up and can't move. Or you move through the day but feel like a ghost. You're not here, not fully. You're watching yourself go through the motions and wondering when you stopped feeling alive. And that's where I found myself. And it wasn't sudden, it was a slow slide, a gentle descent into numbness that I didn't even realize was happening. Because I kept going, I kept performing, I kept pretending, until pretending wasn't sustainable anymore. Until my mind and body finally aligned and said, this isn't working. It didn't look dramatic from the outside. I didn't quit my job or disappear. I just started saying no. I stopped pushing. I canceled things without explaining. I began sitting with myself in silence, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't have the energy to do anything else. And in that silence, I heard things I hadn't allowed myself to hear in years. I heard how tired I was, not just physically, but emotionally. I heard how long I'd been carrying everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. I heard how loud the world had gotten inside my head. So many expectations, so much pressure, all demanding more, more, more. And I heard how desperately I wanted to be still, to be unseen, just for a moment, to not be needed, to not have to show up for anyone but myself. That was the beginning of something new, something quiet and sacred, a kind of falling apart that made space for a deeper return. I didn't know it then, but I had started the process of coming back to myself. Not by doing more, but by doing less. Not by fixing myself, but by listening to myself, truly listening. I started noticing the smallest things, the way the sunlight hit the floor in the morning, the way my breath felt when I slowed down, the way certain songs made me cry for no reason. And then I realized they weren't for no reason. They were unlocking something. They were touching parts of me that I had shut down. Parts that were still soft, still alive, still holding on. And slowly I started to feel again, not all at once, not with a grand revelation, but in fragments. I felt peace in the quiet moments. I felt anger at the things I'd been tolerating. I felt sadness for the ways I'd abandoned myself, and I let myself feel it, fully, no distraction, no numbing, just presence. And in that presence, I started to remember who I was. I began to choose differently. I stopped saying yes out of obligation. I stopped apologizing for needing space. I stopped explaining myself to people who never really listened in the first place. I started honoring my needs, even when they didn't make sense to anyone else. I started building a life that felt like support, not survival. And that meant redefining everything. Success wasn't about how much I could produce. It was about how connected I felt to what I was doing. Rest wasn't a reward. It was a requirement. Connection wasn't about how many people I could keep around. It was about how safe I felt with myself. And happiness, it wasn't something to chase. It was something to return to. Something that lived inside me when I got quiet enough to hear it. The people around me didn't always understand. Some drifted away. Some grew uncomfortable with the version of me that wasn't so available anymore. But the ones who stayed, they met the real me. Not the exhausted, people-pleasing version, but the grounded, present, honest one. And the connection was different. It was real. It wasn't built on obligation or guilt. It was built on truth. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They're invitations. Invitations for people to meet you where you truly are, not where you're pretending to be. And the right people, they rise to meet you. They respect your space. They listen without needing you to explain everything. They hold you without needing to fix you. And they stay, not for who you were, but for who you're becoming. There's something beautiful about becoming, about unbecoming everything you're not, and slowly, patiently, intentionally stepping into who you were always meant to be. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in the quiet, in the choosing, in the returning, again and again and again. This is what healing looks like. Not a straight line, not a perfect arc, but a series of gentle returns to your breath, to your body, to your truth. It's messy, it's non-linear. It's often invisible to the outside world, but inside, it's sacred, it's transformational, and it's yours. You start to feel it in your bones when you're finally ready to change.